All right, so welcome everyone. We're diving deep today, deep into the world of Chris Butler and his organization, the Science of Identity Foundation,
Oh, yeah?
which is also known as the Czaitanii mission.
Right.
We've got leaked documents, devotee testimonials, and critical analyses, all in the mix.
And honestly, it's kind of a puzzle, isn't it?
It is.
So,
We're going to try to understand what happens when you mix spiritual seeking with
right.
allegations of financial misconduct, manipulation, and the leader shrouded in secrecy.
Yeah, it is fascinating. It really is a puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think to start piecing it together, we really need to understand the foundation.
Okay.
Like, what are Chris Butler's teachings?
Mm.
And how do they differ from traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is, the branch of Hinduism they're based on?
Okay, yeah, that's a great place to start. So we actually have some excerpts from Butler's own words.
Okay.
And in these, he tells his followers to be lower than the straw in the street.
Wow.
He tells them to see themselves as, like, the most sinful.
Really?
It's all about surrendering to Krishna's love. But the language is really interesting. Definitely leans into self-criticism, even, like, self-flagellation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, self-reflection is obviously a big part of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. But the goal there is to recognize
Yeah.
our dependence on Krishna,
Yeah.
not to constantly berate ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
So Butler's teachings almost seem to like twist that into something that could actually breed fear and guilt.
So it becomes less about genuine self-improvement and more about control.
Well, it's hard to say definitively, right?
Yeah.
That's certainly a question worth exploring. And it becomes, I think, even more relevant when you start to look at this leaked document we have that outlines these unwritten rules of the group.
Okay.
So essentially, these are guidelines that kind of dictate how devotees are expected to behave, but they're not publicly available.
Ooh, that's a little shady.
Yeah.
What kind of rules are we talking?
Well, for starters,
Yeah.
there's a strict prohibition against criticizing Butler, even if his actions seem questionable.
Okay.
Devotees are expected to obey their leaders without question.
Okay.
And they're very strongly discouraged from interacting with other spiritual groups.
So, wow, that's incredibly isolating. It's like they're trying to create this bubble where Butler's word is law.
Right, and that's where we start to see parallels to what experts call cult dynamics, right?
Okay.
So, charismatic leader
Right.
demands for unquestioning loyalty, isolation from the outside world. These are all tactics that can have a profound psychological impact on people, right? It makes it very difficult for them to think critically or to question the leadership.
And speaking of questioning leadership, we have to talk about Tapasya Das.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he was Butler's, like, right-hand man for years.
What did he use?
A high-ranking member who eventually broke away.
He did.
And became this vocal critic.
Yeah. Tapasya Das's story is really important.
Right.
Because he offers us kind of a glimpse into the inner workings of the organization from someone who was deeply entrenched.
Right.
And his criticism adds weight to this idea that there might be manipulation at play.
Okay.
He even directly called out some of Butler's teachings as instilling fear in the followers.
It's one thing to have outsiders criticizing the group.
Exactly.
But for someone like Tapasya Das to turn against Butler, that definitely
that raises eyebrows.
Raises some eyebrows.
Yeah.
And then we have to look at how Tapasya Das was ultimately dethroned, right?
Yeah.
Supposedly because of financial mismanagement.
Right. And the timing of that is interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
Because it happened right around the time that he started publicly criticizing Butler.
Right.
So was he pushed out to silence him?
Right.
Was he used as a scapegoat
Yeah.
to deflect criticism
Right.
and maintain control? These are important questions.
It really adds another layer
It
to
does.
this whole picture of control that we're starting to see, right? And especially when you consider the allegations
Oh, yeah.
of financial motives. and exploitation within the organization.
And those are pretty serious allegations, right?
They are.
We're talking about claims.
Yeah.
That Butler lived this lavish lifestyle while some followers struggled financially.
Right.
That he accepted donations from potentially questionable sources.
Yeah.
And that he enforced rules that were designed to control devotees' livelihoods.
Yeah, like that no competition rule.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That we talked about before, where devotees had to get permission from Butler to start any business.
Yeah.
And if it was deemed competitive with his own ventures, they were either shut down or forced to give him a cut of their profits.
I mean, that raises some major ethical
red flags.
Right. I mean, if he was genuinely interested in his followers' well-being, wouldn't he encourage their financial independence rather than using them to increase his own wealth? I mean, it's a big question mark that hangs over the whole organization.
And then there's the allegation that Butler actually rejected a proposal for a more decentralized mission.
Decentralized, yeah.
One that wouldn't...
Under his control.
Under his direct control.
Right. And if that's true, that really strengthens this argument that he was primarily concerned with, maintaining
his own authority.
Right. Rather than fostering,
genuine
spiritual growth. It suggests a desire for power. Rather than a selfless dedication to his followers.
Spiritual journeys,
yeah.
So we're starting to see a pattern here.
We are.
Where
it seems like
control, manipulation, and even exploitation.
Potentially.
Deeply embedded within the science of identity foundation.
It's starting to look that way, isn't it?
Yeah.
And tragically, the consequences of these actions seem to extend beyond financial gain.
Yeah.
We have accounts of devotees experiencing real psychological harm as a result of the manipulation and control they faced.
This is where Cassia's story comes in, right? She was a devotee who
committed suicide. Yeah.
And there are allegations that the organization failed to provide adequate support when she was struggling.
Cassia's story is incredibly heartbreaking.
It is.
And it forces us to ask some difficult questions, right? Did the pressure to conform, the isolation from outside support, the constant self-criticism, did these things contribute to her despair?
It's a tough question.
It is a tough question.
It's one we have to ask.
We do.
And unfortunately, Cassia's story isn't the only one that suggests this dark side of this organization.
Yeah, there are also allegations of sexual misconduct and abuse
within the group.
It's incredibly disturbing.
It is.
And it underscores the potential for abuse. When you have a leader who is a godlike
figure
and a culture of unquestioning obedience. It creates an environment where people are afraid to speak up, afraid to challenge, afraid to seek help.
It seems like even Butler's inner circle wasn't immune to tragedy.
Sadly,
There's the story of Tusta Krishna Das.
Yeah.
He was a high-ranking member who died of cancer. And some former devotees believe that his death, along with other misfortunes that befell high-ranking members, were karmic consequences
for the organization's actions.
Whether or not you believe in karma, it adds another layer of tragedy to an already complex and concerning situation.
It's really hard to reconcile this pattern of manipulation and potential harm with this image of a pure and selfless spiritual path. It's difficult. It certainly is. And I think it's important to remember that this is just one perspective on a complicated story. There are many other voices and experiences out there.
And we want to hear them.
We do.
So for all of you listening, what stands out to you in all of this? What questions are you are swirling around in your mind?
Hold on to those thoughts.
Yeah, hold on to those thoughts.
Because we're going to delve even deeper.
In part two
of
this deep dive.
Of our deep dive.
We'll be exploring the impact of the Science of Identity Foundation.
Yes.
On devotees' lives.
Right.
Both
inside and outside.
Inside and outside.
The group will also be taking a closer look at the organization's
financial practices,
and the allegations
of exploitation.
It's going to get even more complex. So
buckle up.
Buckle up. Picking up where we left off, it's important to remember that the Science of Identity Foundation presented a very specific image to the outside world.
Right.
One faith and love and connection to Krishna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as we're starting to see, the reality for many devotees was
much more complicated.
Yeah, much more complicated.
What their lives actually like.
Yeah.
Inside the organization.
Well, from the testimonials that we have, it's clear that life for devotees revolved around intense devotion, but it was also heavily regulated by, all sorts of rules and restrictions.
Yeah, and not just like dietary restrictions.
Yeah.
Or chanting routines.
Not just that.
You're talking about those unwritten rules that we discussed earlier.
The ones that controlled so much.
So much of devotees' lives.
All their lives.
Right. Remember that rule about never criticizing Butler?
Yeah.
That created an environment where people were afraid to speak up.
Right. Right.
They were afraid to express any doubts that they might have had. I mean, imagine living like that.
Yeah.
Constantly walking on eggshells. Terrified of.
Right.
Accidentally challenging his authority.
It sounds suffocating.
It does. And then you got that rule about
isolating
themselves.
Yeah, isolating themselves from
other spiritual groups.
Other spiritual groups, yeah.
I mean, that essentially cuts people off from any outside perspectives or support systems. It's like they're creating this echo chamber where Butler's teachings are the only truth allowed,
And that makes it incredibly hard to leave, even if you're unhappy.
Right, because you've been conditioned to believe that the outside world is dangerous and negative.
That level of control over someone's social life is really troubling.
Yeah. It really reminds me of tactics that are used by other
high control
groups.
Right. Yeah.
Isolate individuals.
Make them dependent
on the group.
Right.
And then instill fear
of the outside
world.
Yeah. It's a classic pattern. Right. And we even saw it reflected into Pasidasa's story, right? Even though he was
high ranking, as soon as he started to question Butler, he was
ostracized,
pushed out.
Oh.
It's almost like a warning to other devotees.
Right.
Like, stay in line or
this will happen.
This could happen to you.
And
those consequences could be severe. I mean, we saw those leaked documents that people could be
publicly shamed.
Or even expelled. Completely expelled from the group for breaking the rules.
Right. And that expulsion wasn't just about leaving the physical community. Right.
It often meant losing your
entire social circle.
Your support system.
Right.
Even your
spiritual path
as you knew it.
Right.
It was a form of social death. Almost, that could be absolutely devastating.
It's heartbreaking to think about.
It is.
I mean, leaving a high control group like this is incredibly difficult.
It is.
You're not just leaving a
community. You're questioning your whole belief system.
Your sense of identity. Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage to break free from that.
It does.
And for many devotees, their entire lives revolved around the Science of Identity Foundation. Right. Dedicated
their time,
their energy, their finances
to this organization. So walking away means starting over in so many ways. And then there's that.
And then there's the
psychological manipulation.
To
contend with too, right? I mean, Butler's teachings with their emphasis on self-criticism and the need for his guidance.
Right. You get trapped in this cycle of self-doubt and the need for external validation.
Yeah.
And that dependence makes it even harder
to break free.
Yeah. You start to believe that you need
you need his approval. His approval to be a
good person, worthy of love. Right.
To be worthy of love. It's insidious.
And as we've seen, the consequences of staying silent can be Dire.
Yeah, Kashia's story, the devotee who
committed suicide, right.
really highlights the potential for
harm
in these kinds of
environments.
Kazuya's story is a tragic reminder that
emotional well-being
should be a top priority
for any spiritual organization,
right?
Preach about love and compassion,
right?
Isn't enough.
It's not enough.
You have to create a culture
right.
where people feel safe. To express doubts. To ask for help.
To be
vulnerable.
And
it doesn't seem like
that was
it was always the case.
Within
the Science of Identity Foundation.
Yeah, this pressure
to conform.
To obey. To be the perfect devotee.
Right, the perfect devotee.
But have created an environment where people were afraid
to show weakness.
Or to admit
that they were struggling.
Yeah,
you hit the nail on the head.
The fear of judgment could prevented people from seeking help. When they desperately needed it. Yeah, Kazuya's story is a
stark reminder
that
these issues need to be
addressed head on,
not
brushed under the rug.
So,
what about the devotees who did manage to leave the Science of Identity Foundation? What was it like for them trying to reintegrate the outside world?
Into the outside world. Well, it varied.
Yeah.
Some people found the transition relatively smooth.
Okay.
They reconnected with loved ones, rebuilt their lives, maybe even found new spiritual paths.
A spiritual path that resonated with them. But for others, it sounds like... the scars
of their experience lingered.
Right. Yeah. They might struggle with trust issues.
Okay.
Feelings of guilt and shame. The trauma of being manipulated and controlled.
And these effects can be...
long-lasting.
Very long-lasting.
Right.
It takes time and effort.
To heal.
To rebuild your sense of self, to learn to...
Trust your own intuition again.
And
for those who were ostracized by the group, that pain of rejection could be incredibly
intense.
Imagine losing not only your
community, but
your friends
and family.
Yeah. And often they're made to feel like it's their fault, their fault, that they were somehow flawed or unworthy.
Yeah, that just adds another layer of pain to an
already difficult
situation.
It's crucial. It's crucial that that resources and support systems are available
for people. For people leaving.
Yeah, leaving high control groups.
They need
understanding
of space.
That takes space.
To process their experiences.
And help rebuilding their lives.
Yeah. And we all have a responsibility to raise awareness of these issues.
Absolutely.
Right. So that
others can be more informed.
And
less vulnerable
to these kinds of
to these manipulative
tactics. The more we understand how these groups operate, the better equipped we are
to protect ourselves.
And protect ourselves and our loved ones.
Knowledge is power. Right. And speaking of power, I think it's time we delve into one of the most controversial aspects of the Science of Identity Foundation.
The financial practices.
Yeah. Let's take a closer look.
At those allegations.
Of financial exploitation.
And see
what we can
unpack.
Okay, so we've really gotten a sense of how the Science of Identity Foundation operated and the impact it had on devotees' lives. Now I think it's time we dive into the financial side of things. There are a lot of allegations surrounding Chris Butler's personal wealth and how the organization handled money.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crucial aspect to examine, especially with those claims.
Yeah.
That he personally profited from the organization.
Right.
Sources mention allegations of lavish gifts.
Yeah.
Luxurious lifestyle that didn't quite match
The simplicity he preached.
The simplicity he preached.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast.
Yeah, it is.
And it becomes even more concerning when you consider the, the financial strain that was placed on some devotees.
Right.
With that no competition rule, right?
Absolutely.
Where
people's livelihoods
were directly tied to
Butler's approval.
Butler's approval.
It creates this unsettling power dynamic.
Yeah, it does.
It does, where instead of encouraging,
financial independence
and entrepreneurship.
Right.
It seems like the system was maybe designed to funnel money upwards,
Right,
benefiting him and
potentially
those in his inner circle.
Right. And then there's the question of the donations.
Right.
The Science of Identity Foundation relied heavily on contributions from followers. But some allegations suggest that that Butler accepted money from questionable sources. Yeah, even groups with ties to criminal activity.
That's a serious accusation.
Yeah, it is.
If true,
right.
It raises questions about the organization's ethical standards, and whether financial gain might have been prioritized
over spiritual integrity.
Yeah,
yes.
it definitely complicates this narrative
of a purely spiritual mission. Yeah, it makes you wonder, if the pursuit of enlightenment was truly the driving force behind everything, or if there were
other motivations
at play.
It's a difficult thing to consider.
It is,
especially for those who dedicated years of their lives,
right,
and significant portions
of their income
to the organization. And it's it's important to note that these allegations of financial impropriety don't concern Butler himself.
Right.
There are accounts of high-ranking members also
using their positions for personal gain. Right.
Potentially
at the expense of
lower-ranking
devotees.
So
it wasn't just a top-down issue.
Right. It sounds like this culture of potential exploitation might have permeated the entire structure of the Science of Identity Foundation.
Like the Science of Identity Foundation.
It makes it even more difficult
to separate
the genuine spiritual aspiration
of the devotees
from the actions of those in leadership positions.
Right.
It underscores the need for
transparency
and accountability in any organization, especially one that claims to guide people on a spiritual path.
Yes, this whole deep dive has been a cautionary tale.
It has.
Hasn't it? It's a reminder that even in spiritual communities, power can be misused. And good intentions can be distorted.
Distorted for personal gain.
Yeah.
It's a sobering thought.
It is,
but it also reinforces the importance of
critical thinking
and informed decision making. We can't just blindly follow any leader, no matter how
charismatic or convincing
they may seem.
Right.
We have to
research.
You got to research
on questions.
Trust our own intuition.
Our spiritual journey is our own responsibility, right?
We need to
choose paths that align
with
our values.
And
our deepest sense
of truth. Right. And we shouldn't be afraid
to challenge authority.
Yeah. To seek out different perspectives. Or walk away from anything that just feels wrong. This conversation has been eye-opening, to say the least. Have uncovered some disturbing patterns within the Science of Identity Foundation.
Absolutely.
And it's clear that there are still
many unanswered questions.
A lot of
unanswered questions.
But I think one of the most important takeaways here.
Yeah, the importance of
open dialogue.
Right,
sharing our experiences.
Right.
Asking tough questions.
Yeah,
and supporting those who've been harmed.
Right.
It's crucial to creating
more ethical and compassionate
spiritual landscape.
Yeah. We've all got to work together.
We do.
To ensure that. seeking spiritual growth
doesn't come
at the cost of our
well-being or
financial security.
It's about fostering critical thinking. Encouraging healthy skepticism. And demanding
ethical leadership
within these
communities.
Yeah.
And most importantly, it's about remembering that true spirituality comes from connecting
with our own
inner light. From blindly following
someone else's
path. That's a beautiful note to
It is. Thanks for
to end on.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us on this
deep dive.
We hope it sparked
some reflection.
And encouraged you to
continue
exploring these important topics. We'll be back next week with another fascinating
exploration into the world of belief and spirituality.
Until then,
keep those minds open.
Those hearts alight.
And always keep questioning.